Hello and welcome everybody to the second episode of the CGSP Roundtable. I'm Eric Olander in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, and I'm joined by our amazing team of editors around the world. Today we've got an amazing show from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Let me just do some introductions first before we get started. You'll see joining us from Jerusalem is Johnny Essa, who is our Mideast editor. Johnny, I'd like to say it's great to see you, but at the same time, it's painful and heartfelt to see you, given the fact that you're living in the middle of a war zone right now.
Yeah. So thank you for having me. It's a pleasure joining you all.
Okay, and then also joining us today for the first time is our Southeast Asia editor, Antonia Timmerman, joining us from Jakarta. She's been on our podcast before, and since this is really the second show, it's only the first time she's been on the CGSP Roundtable. But hey, Antonia, how's everything going today?
Good. It's very hot
Okay.
here in Jakarta, as
It is
usual.
hot here in Saigon too. And then also last but certainly not least, our Africa editor. Many of you know him from the podcast in our episode last time, Jérôme. A very good afternoon to you. Bonjour, Jérôme.
Good afternoon. Bonjour to you guys, and I'm happy to be back again for this conversation.
Okay, well, before we get started in today's show, I just want to give a heartfelt thanks to everybody who watched our first episode. We weren't really sure what was going to come of it. We asked you guys to be nice, and lo and behold, you were. I mean, it was not something that any of us expected. How nice everybody was and how supportive everybody was. So we just really want to thank you. On YouTube, you can't take for granted that people are just not awful. And so it was really great that everybody was so supportive, and we're so glad that you enjoyed the first conversation. We hope that you're going to enjoy today's conversation as well. We've got 4 topics for you. Each one of us is kind of bringing a topic that we're covering. We're not going to say that these are the most important topics in the world. We're going to say that these are the topics that introduce us and that we're kind of thinking about, writing about. And the whole point of this show is to be able to just get you to think more broadly about what China's doing in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, and elsewhere around the world. So our first topic is going to be with Johnny about China's Mideast diplomacy and the point of view from Jerusalem. Then we're going to talk about what's going on here in Southeast Asia, particularly in the South China Sea, with China and the Philippines. And then Antonia is going to talk to us about EV manufacturing in Indonesia, but also what's happening with TikTok in Indonesia. And then with Jérôme, we're going to wrap it up with a great debt story coming out of the International Monetary Fund, and really exciting to have another debt conversation, Jérôme. We're going to do it again, but I feel like we have to have this conversation every single day.
I think it's important. We have to have that conversation. The debt issue needs to be addressed with the right fact and information. And I'm guess that with the IMF reports came out, I think that many people are going to be, some are going to be upset and some are going to be happy.
Well,
but let's see.
Let's see. Okay, let's start with the Middle East. And let me just kind of bring you up to speed on everything that's been going on with the Middle East. And it really is quite something rather remarkable that we're seeing right now. Zhai Jun, who's the Chinese Special Envoy to the Middle East, he has been really making the rounds throughout the region. First, before he left for the Middle East, he met in Beijing with the Israeli ambassador, and there he stated the 2-state solution. This is their talking point, and it's really not made the Israelis very happy. The Israeli embassy in Beijing has been furious in many respects with the Chinese position, particularly because it took the Chinese almost a full week to respond to what happened on October 7th, the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas in southern Israel. The Chinese still have refused to name Hamas as a terrorist group, and that's been something that's been a point of contention. Then, Zhai Jun went to Cairo last weekend. He participated in the Cario Peace Summit. This was a pretty low-key affair, and again, it's a little bit surprising in part because the Chinese made such a big brouhaha about how they were the new mediators of choice. They were going to bring peace to the Middle East. They brought a lot of that attention because of what they did in the Iran-Saudi deal. They started talking about that they wanted to mediate the Arab and Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but at the same time, they're taking a very low-key approach. You didn't hear from Zhai at all at the Cairo Peace Summit. Then he started having kind of bilateral meetings, one-on-one with different governments throughout the region. Here he's meeting with the Egyptian team after the Cairo Peace Summit. He then went off to, let's see, this is in Qatar as well. So he's been making the rounds. Johnny, let's turn it over to you about, you know, your view from Jerusalem, from an Arab point of view in Jerusalem, as well as an Israeli point of view. How do they see the Chinese and what they've been doing so far?
So, good morning again to you all. I'm going to start with the Israeli point of view. So the Israelis are absolutely furious about the way the Chinese are handling the situation. They were expecting complete condemnation of the attacks, and they were expecting, let's say, China standing by what has happened, and not just reiterating the talking point of the two-state solution. So for the Israelis right now, for the government and for the people, they believe that it's not time for diplomacy. It's time for actions. It's time for dealing with the situation on the ground, and then diplomacy will come later. Unfortunately for the Chinese, they see things differently. So they're reiterating the two-state solution. They're iterating more the humanitarian aspect of it. This is just infuriating the Israeli government and the Israeli side. On the other hand, the Arab side is seeing things differently. The Arab side is more looking for a long-term solution that is basically what the Chinese are trying to do. So, so the Chinese, including the Special Envoy Zhai Jun, uh, including statements from the Foreign Minister Wang Yi, they're trying to reiterate the problem of being a long-term problem that needs to be handled. But for now, the Israelis and let's say most European actors and most Western actors are looking at the thing differently. They want to handle the situation right now by force or by immediate measures, and then reach a solution that has to do with talking about the situation.
But to be fair, though, China's position is aligned fully with the Arab world. I mean, the entire Arab world, and not even just the Arab world. It's aligned with in many African countries are coming up behind what the Arab position is, which is the two-state solution. I mean, in many ways, Israel and the West are the outliers here, and China's with the majority. I mean, isn't that a fair way to say it? I mean, Israel's on the wrong side of this in that respect.
It is a fair way to say it, but the problem is on the ground here, Israelis and the Americans are the actors that are making they're making the pace more than the Chinese here on the ground right now. So when you have last week, Biden was here, and yesterday, Emmanuel Macron was here, and and the UK Prime Minister as well. So there's a picture of being right versus wrong. So they're picturing it as the right side, the Western side versus the axis of, I don't want to say the axis of evil.
I mean, we're going down dangerous territory here.
Of course.
Giraud.
No. I'll say it how the Israelis are perceiving it.
Right.
So they're saying the West. So they're saying it like this is a perception. This is a story of the Enlightenment versus terrorism. So you need to be on the side of enlightenment against the side of terrorism. And unfortunately, they're seeing two spheres: the Western sphere led by the United States, and the other sphere, which is led by Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah. And they're afraid that China is trying to be neutral on both sides. And they wanted China to be more of a leaping frog from from the from the one side to the west, and this is
Okay.
not happening.
So let me just get Antonia and Giro's reaction. Antonia, when you hear this between this east-west divide, if you will, what's your reaction to what Johnny's saying?
I think Indonesia's position has always been more aligned with most of the Arabic countries. So we are definitely condemning Israel's response to Hamas's attack. And most of the people here, I see that they are very appalled by what we see on social media. Like we see very terrible civilian casualties. So I think ceasefire is one of our main demands here in Indonesia, and also the Indonesian government. They're always saying, they stick to their talking points, right? They want Palestine to be free, two-state solution. So that's
and Indonesia carries a lot of weight in this regard, Johnny, because it's the largest Muslim country in the world. And if I'm correct, I don't think Israel and Indonesia even have diplomatic relations at this point. I think I read that earlier. So it's a point of contention. But Giro, these dividing lines between China, the West, this rhetoric about good versus evil. I mean, we've heard this before in Africa for a long time. I mean, a long time.
This is the kind of rhetoric that leads you straight to the path of war. As soon as you come to the conclusion to divide who's the good, who's the evil, it's over. It's basically you create a context where you justify everything that you need to do to protect the good. And we see that, unfortunately, in the reaction that Israel is having in the Gaza Strip, because as long as the narrative has been built and set in stone by the Hamas is bad and is evil, basically all the media in the West and all the media in the US, they're just reacting to the way to Israel reaction in Gaza with, no, Israel is defending itself. Israel is trying to do something for itself because they've been attacked first and everything. So in that context, any discussion, any fruitful discussion becomes impossible, because you really have to take one step back to be able to say, hey guys, if we want to move forward to find a sustainable, long-term viable solution, we need to remove the divide. We need to remove the narrative good versus evil, because it's cuts the discussion in the middle, removing all the nuances that we need to approach that problem in the Middle East. There are a lot of nuances that's required here if we want to find a solution. But so far, no one wants to find that nuance, at least from Israel and the West side. They don't want to put the nuance in. As if you put the nuance in the debate, it's like you are kind of, in a way, condemning Israel reaction, and they don't want to do that. So they're like, okay, no, it's good versus evil. But with that position, we won't be able to move forward. And I understand China reaction in a certain way, because let's face it, China doesn't want to frustrate anybody. China, I would say China is in a certain way a kind of people pleasing country, in a way that as long as it's not in the south, it's not in the south.
Be careful down that path.
Yes, exactly. As long as it's not close home, everywhere else we can still be try to please everyone and to appease everyone. And I think that's kind of frustrate Israel. And I think that approach is required if we want to find a long-term solution in the crisis.
So, Johnny, Israel and China do $21 billion of trade every year. That's a lot for Israel, not so much for China. Does this relationship recover after the war, or do you get the sense that people are so hurt by what's happened and upset that the China-Israel relationship is damaged for at least the foreseeable future?
I think the economic relations are not going to go anywhere. So they're going to keep doing economic business. So you don't have to be an expert to know that there's a lot of economic interactions going on between Israelis and Chinese. Just go outside, and from every 10 cars, you'll see 7 or 8 Chinese EVs.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, let me just, sorry to interrupt you, but let me just ask you a question. If that's the case, then you can make the argument that China made absolutely the right decision in how it's handling this, because no economic damage, it's aligning itself with a much larger population. It didn't really have a strong political relationship with the Israelis anyway, because there's a perception in Beijing that that Israel is very much in the camp of the Americans anyway. You were never going to peel Israel away from the United States. So what's the loss for China by taking this position?
I think the only loss that may happen is if it comes and tries to mediate in the future between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It may be seen as biased. Besides that, I don't feel tactically, strategically, if I if I was on advising the Chinese, more likely I would done the same thing. I'm being honest here.
I know.
don't-
I mean, it seems
Anyway.
like they kind of played the game well in that respect. I mean, I'm
Exactly.
not
think
saying
they
it's right
played
or
the game
wrong.
well
I
on 3
mean-
points. First, now, like most of the global South and most of, let's say, the larger Arab countries that do more business with China are on the same page. Secondly, they're an alternative to the U.S. We just going back last week and seeing how China was furious over the U.S. veto of UN action on the Israeli-Hamas war, and even their ambassador to the United Nations, Zhang Jun, going and expressing very aggressively, and Wang Yi, the foreign minister, expressing that the actions of the Israelis have been going over the step of self-defense.
Oh,
So
and
this is
let me just mention one thing here, just so that everybody understands what you're talking about.
Yes.
There was a resolution put forward by Brazil at the United Nations last week in order to call for a humanitarian pause so that aid could get in. 13 members of the Security Council out of the 15, in fact, it's 12 or 13, voted in favor of it. Russia abstained, and I think there was one other that abstained, and the United States exercised its veto, and that pissed off so many people. And so, Johnny, I guess the point that I want to bring up is that you talk about the potential collateral damage of China's reputation as a mediator, but at the end of the day, the United States is just as partisan in many respects towards Israel and not seen as a credible mediator with the Palestinians or the Arab side either.
Yeah, so the only thing that I can point to is that even the Israelis are overwhelmed or are surprised of the U.S. Unconditional support that they've got. So they thought they would get support from the Americans, but they didn't believe that they would get this much support. Maybe it has to do with Joseph Biden's approach on Israel and the Middle East. But in all, they also know that this support is going to come with a price.
It is, and let's just be very clear here. By the way, you haven't gotten the support yet from the United States. The checks haven't been signed. The U.S. Congress is not working very well right now, and they're the ones who have to approve the big budgets that support those aid.
But not,
so, you know.
But this is the first time in history, like I don't know, like the United States and its government and its administration, it is even helping with the war effort and even helping with managing the war. Maybe they don't trust the Israeli government, and that's one of the reasons they don't trust the right extremist Israeli government. Maybe they're trying to do some crisis management. But on the other hand, this is the first time in history that the U.S. president has been very blunt on supporting Israel. Like, do whatever you need to do, and we're backing you.
Okay,
that's not helping at all.
Yeah, I mean, Giraud, if we weren't going to get hostile comments on our first show, we're bound to get them in the second show. I mean,
sure.
This is such an emotional, topic for everybody.
I know for this show, people are going to come back on, are going to come on us about a comment, but That's not helping. Let's face it.
We're
That's
talking
really
about the Middle East, so the
I
Middle
mean,
East
it's
is always
exactly.
gonna
We're
well,
talking
China
about the
spur
too, so
emotion.
that'll do it.
So
So
that's why I
okay,
even believe that China believing that it could mediate peace between Israel and Palestine was just, I don't know, it was a dream.
I was
mean,
wondering about that actually. Like realistically, what can China do? I mean,
well,
what kind of
no.
leverage?
but no
If
more
it
than what the
does want
U.S.
to,
can do. I mean, no more. I mean, the U.S. has no credibility in the Arab-Palestinian community any more than China does on the Israeli side.
Exactly. So it's a very tricky
So
situation. So China coming to, because China doesn't have the historical background anyway. It doesn't have the historical leverage with the region.
Yeah.
It doesn't have that much depth in the region. China being able to quote unquote broke the peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and they say quote unquote, was just not enough for it to believe that yes, we can go in the Middle East and break the peace between Israel and Palestine, where those who've been there for so long had leverage, have historical background, still are failing miserably into finding a peace in the region.
Okay, well, let's move on. Thank you, Johnny. We really appreciate it. Now we're going to move on to a story that I've been following here very closely in many respects. From those of us out here in Southeast Asia, I'm going to argue that this is actually an even more important story than what we're seeing in the Philippines. Last Sunday, I'm sorry, not in the Philippines, in the Middle East. Here last Sunday, if you were paying attention to what's been going on in the news, 2 Philippine vessels collided ever so briefly. Let me show you what these collisions actually looked like. I've got a couple slides here for you. So here we go. This is what they looked like here. We'll go ahead and take that full so you can see it clearly. That's a Chinese Coast Guard cutter there in the back. And you can see how a small Philippine vessel tried to kind of, go right in front of a Chinese Coast Guard cutter on the way to the Second Thomas Shoal, which is a disputed territory in the South China Sea. And what makes this whole situation so terrifying is that the United States is a formal treaty partner of the Philippines. Now, the Philippines came out just this week and said that it is not going to activate its mutual defense treaty unless there are shots fired between the two sides. So we have not seen that yet, but what we have seen from February until today is a dramatic, steady escalation of the conflict between these two sides. It started with a laser, a high-powered laser that was back in February that was shown from a Chinese Coast Guard cutter onto a Philippine vessel. And then what it's been going is almost every 2 or 3 weeks now, at a weekly basis, there are confrontations as the Philippines is trying to resupply a decrepit World War II ship that is docked above a shoal, and that is their territorial claim. The scary part here with what's been going on is the fact that none of the parties involved have what I call a policy off-ramp. That is, the Chinese have made it very clear they are not going to make any concessions. The Americans, who, again, are operating the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier strike group within 100 kilometers of the Shandong, a Chinese aircraft carrier strike group, they have said they are going to enact the Mutual Defense Treaty if called upon to do so. And the Philippines came out this week and said they are not backing down from resupplying the Second Thomas Shoal. Antonia, I know you have not been following this story that closely, but this question of these territorial disputes in Southeast Asia is something that goes all the way as far down as Indonesia. And this is the 10-dash line. And I mean, talk to people about the sensitivity of these territorial issues more broadly in Southeast Asia and in the South China Sea.
Yeah, I have to admit that this escalation is really not on anyone's radar here in Indonesia recently, because all of our attention is going to the Middle East. So
really interesting.
Yeah.
Not even in Southeast Asia they're thinking about this as much.
What about in Vietnam, though?
In Vietnam, it's a very sensitive issue in Vietnam because they have territorial disputes within the island chains as well. I guess Indonesia is not quite as sensitive in that respect because the territorial disputes that they have with Indonesia are quite minimal.
Bit far. Exactly.
Exactly. I guess this is a more of a question about ASEAN, actually. The last time I talked to analysts about this issue, and it was during the ASEAN summit, right? So they wish ASEAN that could take a bit more proactive approach about South China Sea and not remaining neutral or in the middle, because that is actually what is blocking the issue to be resolved. Because right now ASEAN members itself are divided, right? They're divided into claimant and non-claimant states. And so it seems that this is the thing that ASEAN cannot agree how to move forward.
Yeah, they avoided the topic at the ASEAN summit altogether. And ASEAN, I mean, Joe, you'll recognize ASEAN, it's intentionally weak by its member states. It's like the African Union in many respects, that you want it to be this forceful presence, but the member states intentionally strip away power. They don't want it to take sides. They want to avoid confrontation. And so there's a lot of similarities in many respects to the African Union as well, I find.
Exactly, that's true. And ASEAN in that dispute has been really kind of neutral since China in 2016 or 17, after losing its arbitration against Philippines, came back to ASEAN and tried to push forward the code of conduct that was supposed to take place in ASEAN to, in a way, how to resolve the dispute in the South China Sea. The code of conduct that ASEAN was supposed to put in place was not really into solving the issue, was more into how to manage people, how to manage the countries, how they can talk and solve the issue. And as Antonia pointed out, the ASEAN is clearly divided, where you have one side country that claiming the territory, and the other side, the big country that's China, is like, I want to claim that territory as well. And you have some small country like Laos, Thailand, who doesn't want to get on the bad side of China, who kind of all the ways play in the middle of the game, in the middle of the park, at the end putting ASEAN in a position where they're just unable to find a clear-cut solution in South China Sea. And so this is where you really kind of, for me, in that regard, I believe that China, despite the claim he's making, beyond the historical background it's putting on the table about the claim, I think China needs to use much more soft power into seducing, convincing his regional partners and country in a way that to create a common security context where they find themselves safe in that region. So far, China is playing a lone game. I'm worried about my own safety because you countries are allowing American bases in your territory, in your seas, in your waters. So for me, for my safety, I want to claim that territory for myself. And this is where the problem become really serious to find a solution there.
The Chinese will claim that the territorial claims predate even the conflict with the United States. They go back, they go back centuries. They assert. Let me just show you again, kind of a narrative here that's really important to understand. So this is from Jay Torella, who's one of the senior commanders from the Armed Forces of the Philippines. He's been very effective at mobilizing public opinion against the Chinese in Southeast Asia by publishing all of these videos and graphics like this. Now, here what you can see, the red dots on this picture are the Chinese vessels, and the blue dots are the Filipino vessels. And he's trying to point out that the Chinese are just swarming these vessels. Now, what's interesting about this is I just want to bring your attention also to what's been going on in the propaganda war. So for a long time, the Filipinos and the Philippines Coast Guard were bringing on social media influencers, and they were also bringing on the news media to shoot video of these instances. The Chinese didn't do that, but in this instance of last Sunday, the Chinese released their own video within 24 hours, and that's something that's new that we haven't seen before. And so we're seeing a lot of changes in the competition to shape the narrative over this. And Giro, I think that's kind of what you were talking about as well. That's a little bit of the soft power, but I'll tell you, the soft power is a tough sell in this part of the world, given the long,
it's a very long
histories over territory.
Exactly. This is the big problem that I see that China is having in that region. Its inability to really create a soft power that's seducing to its neighbor, to reassure them and to assure itself that we can work together into solving this issue. And so far, I think there will never be a military solution in that regard. And again, here they're gonna tell me I'm against US, but here again, you see US coming and play. I'd say, quite dangerous game in that regard. That's why China will always come back and say, you see, guys, the way you're behaving, the way you react when you have a dispute. Who's talking? The U.S. Pentagon is talking. Say we are ready to intervene if we are called upon. That's not the kind of reaction that's going to bring peace in the region.
By law, there is a treaty law with the United States, with Japan, with South Korea, and what the Americans will say is they are preserving freedom of navigation in international waters. And that freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, by the way, is something we all have a stake with. I think something like $5 trillion. I don't know the exact number. It's an enormous
$5.7 trillion of
$5.7 trillion of international trade flows through the South China Sea. And so we all have a stake in this. Johnny, I think it's probably too much to ask for anybody in Israel right now to be focusing on anything other than what's going on. But I imagine, again, you guys probably can't see through the fog of everything else that's going on right now. But, the United States is a big player, obviously, in the Mideast conflict, and it's obviously central to what's happening here in Southeast Asia and the South China Sea.
Just one question or one clarification maybe you can give to me. What are the ramifications, or what can this conflict lead to in the future instead of a possible military escalation? What do you think? Could a summit or let's say a deal trying to bring the sides together lead to a better solution of the, let's say, maritime deals?
Here's the problem, Johnny. Can you imagine, has Israel indicated that it will cede 1 inch of territory to the Palestinians?
No.
Will it give up any of Jerusalem to the Palestinians?
No.
So does the summit really matter then if it's non-negotiable that any of the territory won't be given up? That's problem number one.
What is the solution then?
Listen, I wrote this today. We don't have a solution right now. And let me just be very, very clear for everybody who's watching this, that we moved one step closer to holy crap when those two boats touched each other. Because let me just paint a picture for you right now in the South China Sea. You've got the USS Ronald Reagan, which is fully equipped, nuclear armed, with 2 or 3 destroyers, probably 4 or 5 submarines underneath, accompanying it. You've got bases in the United States, in the Philippines, in Guam, in Japan, in Korea on standby. You've got the Shandong there. You've got the maritime militia from the Chinese and the Coast Guard. And this is, again, Israel, if it gets out of control, is a terrible, horrific situation in the Mideast, and even a wider regional war. Okay, that would be terrible for the world. Nobody would disagree that would be terrible for the world. But if the United States and China get into a shooting war, the world's number 1 and number 2 navies and powers, it will bring in South Korea, it will bring in Japan. It will go from zero to wholly unimaginable in
World War
2.3
III in
seconds.
minutes.
I don't know, but I don't. It is terrifying to think of what's going on, and that's why for us at CGSP, we're putting this story at the top every day because the stakes are so high, and nobody has a solution, Johnny. Nobody. And there is no effort to bring everybody together. So that's what worries me a little bit.
Exactly,
So
and I think that
hoping a mistake doesn't happen.
Exactly.
And literally, our future is like a bunch of 27-year-olds flying fighter jets over the South China Sea. One mistake, and we're in deep trouble. Really deep trouble.
So if 2 ships hit each
collide,
other,
or sink, imagine if there's a sinking and deaths. That's the concern.
This could directly lead to de-escalation, let's say,
or it could lead to escalation.
But even then, even then, I think even if there were deaths, right? I don't think any ASEAN members would risk war. I don't
exactly.
think so.
No, we're not worried about the ASEAN members.
And development would
we are worried about the Americans and the Chinese.
Even I think even that case, I think countries like Japan, South Korea will do their best to even there is a shooting, even if China shoots or Philippines shoots, I think Japan, South Korea will do their best to avoid any kind of escalation because they do know what's on the stake. And let's not forget it. The reality of that conflict is the fact that if the US comes and starts shooting in the region, I'm going to talk from an African perspective who has been seeing what Western world war comes when it happens in Africa. The narrative is simple. Say, guys, you don't want to let your region being bombarded where those countries are coming from far. Because what's going to happen? It's going to happen in Southeast Asia. It's not going to happen in the US. This is really far, far away from those regions. That's why I do believe that ASEAN countries, those countries are going really to put their foot on the table to say, no matter what's happened here, we won't allow any shooting match happening in the region.
But that goes to Antonio's point that ASEAN needs to play and step up to play a stronger role here, and needs to articulate that says we won't tolerate this, and to encourage all the parties to kind of pull back a little bit from this. You know,
I think they have been relying too much on economic diplomacy, especially when they deal with China. So they need to figure out another route.
I think they also rely on the fact that they tell themselves that US and China are not crazy. They are so responsible. They have a lot in stake that they won't allow themselves to go so far into, shooting match in the region. I think that's why they standing a bit behind, knowing that no, the US and China, they will not go far. And I think next week or next month, there is this the Pentagon delegation is going to arrive to China to have some discussion with Chinese counterparts. Let's see how they're going to go with those discussions. Maybe they're going to put it on the table.
Antonia, you bring up this interesting point that I always try to explain to people about Southeast Asia, how it operates at two different levels. On the one hand, we're seeing this great economic integration where you can lots of cross-border trade, lots more intra-ASEAN trade, and it's really quite exciting. And at the same time, you see on the political side this fragmentation, the security challenges, the differences, and it's really hard to get your head around kind of what ASEAN is in terms of whether it's pulling apart or pulling together or a little bit of both. And it's much more confusing than I think a lot of people understand.
Yeah, I think ASEAN is unique in that way that none of its members is going to put their economic and development agenda in danger, even if it's on the line of this territorial disputes. So they will always put economic agenda at the top, and they're treating it as a diplomacy tool, basically.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue, Antonia, to talk about what's been going on the economic front. And there's been this fascinating thing that you and I have been looking at, and it's really, take a look at some of these headlines, okay? So follow me here. So Indonesia asked Geely help to build homegrown EV by 2026. So we saw this all these announcements in the Indonesian media that Geely, which is the Chinese car company, was going to come to Indonesia. And it was very exciting for Indonesians because it would take from the mine to manufacturing. That is, the nickel is mined there, cobalt is mined there. They would refine it and process it as they've been doing there, and then push it right up the value chain for electric vehicles to be able to produce in Indonesia. Right now, no developing country has ever achieved that level of mine to manufacturing supply chain. But then, oh no, Geely says, no, we're not going to build a factory in Indonesia. That was a little bit of a problem that came in. And so that was interesting to watch. That first it was on, then it was off, and then we heard it again, that Tesla was in talks with Indonesia to build a whole battery city, only for a few weeks later to go, no, it's not going to happen. So is this a question, Antonia, of the media kind of getting ahead of themselves a little bit in these kind of discussions? And I mean, it happened with Geely, it happened with Tesla. What is the story here that you've been seeing?
Mm-hmm. I don't think it's the media. So what happened here? What actually happened is that our senior minister Luhut Panjaitan, he claimed that Geely was going to invest and build a factory in Indonesia. And then, as you mentioned, a few days later, Geely said, no, actually, there are no real plans yet, which is pretty embarrassing. But definitely not the first time that the Indonesian government officials overpromise. and they tend to make a lot of unproven claims. I honestly cannot think of any other reason why they're doing this other than maybe they're just trying to hype up a project. I don't know, so that other potential investors become interested. I don't know what happened behind the scenes, or maybe they truly misunderstand what was said in the meeting because they are overconfident. So yeah, and as you said, it's the same case with Tesla as well. There was a big rumor that Tesla was going to invest in Indonesia, and several senior officials were already saying this, that yes, we are approaching Tesla, and then they're saying, oh, Tesla is very interested, and then they made it seem like it's just about time, that this deal is going to be signed. And then, as we know, we found out that Tesla ended up choosing to partner with Malaysia rather than Indonesia, at least for the time being.
It seemed like a heartbreak for people in Indonesia. They were really bummed out about that one.
Yes. And I guess for me, in my opinion, it makes more sense for Tesla to go with Malaysia. Because,
really? Why?
They're going to hate you.
Yeah, we're going to get hate mail on this one. Oh, my.
Well, I guess I'm sorry for saying this, but objectively, I do think that Malaysia has a more mature car industry than Indonesia.
I think we lost.
Oh, hello? Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, Malaysia already has their national car product, Proton, and they have stronger buying power, so people are more likely to buy Tesla products there. And as far as I know, Malaysia is giving a lot of exemptions and tariff cuts and incentives and all that. So I think in general, yeah, it's still a long way to go for Indonesia's competitiveness when it comes to manufacturing. I guess as a market, yes, we have huge potential, but as a manufacturing hub, we are a bit behind other Southeast Asian countries, not just Malaysia. Like Thailand and Vietnam are also ahead of us. So yeah, that's what I think.
But Gero, Indonesia is one of the countries that you and I follow very, very closely because they have been a pioneer in the mining sector and in many ways also in the manufacturing sector as well. So while Antonio is not as optimistic about it, I think sometimes outsiders and foreigners like us look at Indonesia and go, wow, they're doing things way more progressively than other countries, especially in Africa. And they've led the way for Zambia, Namibia, now Nigeria to launch, new mineral processing laws. And also you can't export raw unprocessed minerals now out of those 3 African countries. That was something that was pioneered by Indonesia. And so Indonesia in many ways is leading the way on this.
Yes, Indonesia has been really leading the way into that with that group of producing country that want to have much more transformation, processing, value chain back home. And it's been showing the example with bauxite. They did that with bauxite. They did that with nickel. They keep on doing that with different minerals. So I do believe that in terms of mining policy and strategy, they get it right, even though they still have some environmental challenges they need to address related to the processing they're doing back home. But in terms of industry, the EV manufacturing, I saw the other day that Indonesia is doing also good in terms of EV cars and manufacturing. But I think they need much more a strong, robust internal markets to allow them to be able to be more competitive in the region, to attract much more businesses. Just to echo to what Antonia was saying when she was kind of don't understand why officials have been hyping up those rhetoric. It just reminds me of those officials in Africa. We do exactly the same thing. When we talk with the Chinese, especially when there is an internal political agenda, we tend to always say things that the Chinese they didn't say explicitly. We tend to say, no, the Chinese are saying they're going to put 2 billion in this. They're going to do this, they're going to do that. In Africa, generally, the Chinese, they just keep quiet. They let it slide. They say nothing. Time passes, and you just notice that nothing happened. But in Indonesia, apparently, since it's really close to home, they felt the need to say, no. We did not say that. We did not say that we're not going to invest in that regard. And I do believe that maybe sometimes political agenda are the ones behind driving the narrative of officials pushing for, say, what not has been said clearly. But I think, as Antonia said, there's a lot of challenges that Indonesia needs to overcome itself to be really more reinforce its EV manufacturing industry to allow much more Chinese company. What I think the Chinese are already willing to come there. Last week I was reading that LG Chem, the Korean, and Zhejiang Huayu have signed an agreement to build a lithium plant in Indonesia. I believe, yeah, if it's lithium, another thing to build in Indonesia as well. So you see that Indonesia keeps on attracting processing and manufacturing and companies back home. But now how they move forward, it's another history.
Okay, well, let's move on to
Yeah.
another topic in Indonesia, though. And this is a topic that Antonia has also been covering. She did a great job writing about this on our website about TikTok. And Indonesia is ground zero right now, again, leading the way here in Southeast Asia and in many countries. They shut down TikTok Shop. That means you cannot buy anything off of TikTok. The e-commerce platform is gone. 6 million vendors were impacted by this. Antonia wrote a great piece for us on our site, which I hope that you'll go and you'll check out. But tell us a little bit more about this, Antonia.
Yes, sure. So yeah, basically Indonesia launched this regulation that says that if you're a social media company, you cannot sell goods directly on your platform. And this effectively bans TikTok Shop, but now not Instagram and Facebook Marketplace, because the difference is while you can see products on Facebook and Instagram, the transaction doesn't happen there. But with TikTok Shop, the transaction happens in the platform. So the regulation effectively only bans TikTok Shop. But just to make it clear for the audience here, I guess it's easy to conflate. If we hear this news, it's easy to conflate it with the banning or the restriction of TikTok around the world, right? We know that in the US, in the EU, it's restricted. In India, even it's a total ban. So yes, these bans and restrictions in these regions may have a lot to do with the tension with China. That is true. But I think that's not the case in Indonesia. Because we know that TikTok Shop's biggest competitors like Shopee, Tokopedia, Lazada, they're also backed by Chinese companies and Chinese investors. And they are actually benefiting from this ban. So we cannot say that the regulation was only to put Chinese companies at a disadvantaged position, right? And then we talked to people in the industry and we talked to analysts, and we found that it's actually more about a bigger problem in the tech, in especially in e-commerce industry itself in Indonesia. So on one hand, yes, you have TikTok going wild here, basically, and they're irritating a lot of competitors. We're hearing reports that they're bypassing import taxes, and they're also flooding the market with super cheap imported goods. And also there are rumors that they're hijacking talents from other competitors. So they are annoying, yes. But also on the other hand, you have the competitors, these companies, Shopee and Lazada and Tokopedia and etc. And they are struggling, right? Even without TikTok's presence, they were already struggling to turn a profit. So if TikTok was allowed to grow the way that it was growing, and if TikTok was allowed to take the market share that it was taking so rapidly, it would have been very devastating for the other e-commerce companies. And at least I think this is what the regulators were thinking. So they just cannot let the industry to collapse. They cannot let another round of layoff happen. So that's
So
why.
you believe that it's much more a market, it's much more a regulation market's decision, in a way that they don't want to create a monopoly into the market, because TikTok coming into the market kind of creates and attract rewards better, attract the best talent, and they were kind of afraid if they let it slide that TikTok is just going to become the only player into the market, right?
Yes, that's correct. So in short, it's to save the tech industry.
But in the same time, they also laid off some people by banning that TikTok eShop market. So how is they're solving the issue? Because those other platforms are not so attractive than TikTok. So what's going to happen to those 6 million? Rick, you say 6 million?
6 million vendors, yeah.
Yeah, 6 million
It's
vendors.
6 million vendors.
Yeah, are going to be able to be
That's a
absorbed
lot.
by the other competitors.
I think they will be absorbed by the other competitors. That's why I said the other competitors will actually benefit from
Okay.
TikTok shop dissolving.
And it's
So,
not just in.
Antonio,
Oh, go ahead, Johnny.
so Antonia, do you think other countries might learn from this regulation? I
Right.
I
So
also know that
yeah.
like in Israel, TikTok is very popular, but the e-commerce side of TikTok hasn't arrived yet. So
Mhm.
not only in Israel, maybe other countries in the Middle
In many
East
countries in
or
Africa
other
as well.
countries around the world. Do you think they will learn from this regulation? And how would you project this story on, let's say, other sectors, not only sectors that have to do with e-commerce and technology?
Right.
Maybe we can
So
start seeing countries regulating other fields to stop, let's say, monopoly on a certain field for a certain agent.
so definitely for the first part of your question, yes, it is already inspiring other countries in Southeast Asia to follow suit. So we are seeing Malaysia and Vietnam are also threatening to ban TikTok. So Malaysia, we're already seeing
Just
Malaysia
TikTok Shop.
government.
Just they're only
TikTok
threatening
shop.
to ban TikTok Shop, not
Sorry,
TikTok.
yeah, right. So Malaysia is saying that they might potentially follow Indonesia to ban TikTok Shop.
That's right.
But I'm reading other news. I'm not too sure what is going on here, but if I read the news, it seems that the government was already targeting TikTok for content. And then maybe they see Indonesia doing this with TikTok Shop, and then they get ideas. So yeah, I see that the Malaysian government was already criticizing TikTok because the government's opponents are using TikTok and they're getting more popular on the platform. So to me, this one looks more political. And same case with Vietnam. I think TikTok dealing with censorship here. The Vietnamese government is already accusing TikTok for some toxic contents that they are saying are threatening Vietnamese culture and tradition. So in both cases, Vietnam and Malaysia, I think it's more political, but I still don't think it's only about China. So I think this is more about censorship. It's about the trend of limiting what can be said online. Because in Vietnam, also I saw, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, I saw Facebook and Twitter facing the same stuff before.
Yep. Yeah,
Because
no, the
I think
censorship issues are real. They don't like the unregulated media here. That so they have to respond to kind of. It's not proactive censorship; it's reactive censorship. So in traditional TV, everything is censored, print, radio, but on social media, they have to respond, and they prefer not to have to do that.
That's right. And basically, I think this is just TikTok finding out in Southeast Asia.
It's a big market for TikTok, the TikTok shop, and so it's a major setback in Indonesia. They had made plans that Indonesia was going to be the centerpiece of their Southeast Asia strategy. Not surprising given the fact that Indonesia is home to 300 million plus people. So that would be the place to go. It is enormous. So this is a huge setback for TikTok and its growth plans in Southeast Asia. And one has to wonder again, will this be a domino effect that other countries will follow? So Antonia, thank you for that. And thank you for your great reporting on that. Once again, I hope that everybody will go check out her coverage of that. And we're going to do some more articles about what TikTok's doing in the region. So Giraud, we're going to kind of let you have the last word here about a fascinating new report that came out last week from the International Monetary Fund saying a lot of what we have been saying for a very long time in terms of the debt. And so let me just read a section that is the most important part here, okay? China's share of sub-Saharan Africa's overall sovereign debt is still relatively small at only 6%. 6%. So, and then they put this nice little graphic up here, which I want to kind of show you, which shows you this is the information that is oftentimes missing, willfully or otherwise, from the discussion about Chinese debt in Africa, and it applies to other parts of the world as well, that the Chinese are actually rather small players. Right now, China accounts for a total of 12% of the continent's total debt over the past 20 years. Here you're looking at sovereign debt that is from the policy banks. Most of this is coming from the in the form of bilateral debt from China Exim Bank, and then there's a little bit of commercial debt that's in there as well. That's what you see, this little section right here. Okay, Giraud, let's have you kind of get your take on this. And it's just frustrating that we keep having the same conversation over and over again. But here we are.
When I reported about it yesterday, I was saying, finally, I do hope is the last nail on the coffin of the debt trap narrative.
No,
I really do
never.
hope so, because
No way.
at this point, if someone comes back again and try to mention debt trap diplomacy, I say, guys, that's just out of not even laziness, out of pure evilness in a way that, I mean, come on. I mean, we've been saying this for years. We've been talking about it, covering about the issues. Chinese investment in Africa has its fair share of real problem that we need to address. Chinese engagement financially in Africa have so many issues that we need to address. But one of the issues that are not among the issues we need to talk is the debt trap narrative. And we cannot just go, when you talk about public debt in Africa, and you say China is responsible without using the fact, without showing the fact, without knowing the fact. Most of the time, we tend to say, no, Chinese, because we saw Chinese loans in Africa growing substantially. That we have to admit. From 2005 to 2021, China growth of, like, in terms of Africa external debt went from 5% to 17%. But the real problem about Africa debt, public debt, that include external debt, show you that China is just a very minimal actor at 6%. So the big problem are more internal domestic loan, commercial loan with high interest, with really short time of maturity that needs to be addressed by many countries in Africa.
And let me actually take Giraud's argument one step further, that the IMF reported that of that 6%, okay, 55% of all of the debt is concentrated in just five countries. Just five countries. So, and most of those countries are big resource exporting countries, Angola, Nigeria, and even in Nigeria, we're looking at 3% of the total public debt is Chinese debt. I mean, again, this argument on Chinese debt in Africa is so weird and messed up, and it's just not even rooted in facts. And Giraud, as you pointed out, all it takes now is a frickin' Google search just to find out. I mean, that's it. It's a Google search. And we've got Boston University, Chatham House, Johns Hopkins. You've got us.
Carnegie.
You've got so many different people who have debunked
and you have the
this
IMF
thing.
now.
And now the IMF that's done this thing. People, I mean, it's willful ignorance at this point. It's absolutely willful ignorance that people don't want to look this up anymore. I mean, it's
exactly.
Just
and this is the real problem that we need to address here. When I saw that, I was like, okay, let's now have a much more constructive discussion around the debt in Africa, what we need to address, what the issue we need to address, so we can really find real solution. Because as long as we shape and frame the question from the wrong perspective, we always gonna have a bad solution. And that has been the case for so many years. I mean, at least for the last 5 years, where it's China is the problem, China is the problem. Now we just confirmed again, China is not the problem. The problem is elsewhere, and that needs to be addressed. Okay. And that report also did something, and it's kind of did not, because China's response was to say, we are not the problem, the private lenders and the IMF are the problem. But that report come and say it's not them either. The problem is actually domestic commercial loan that many African countries got from their own internal market that rose the cost of debt in the countries. And now they stand to 60.9% in total public debt in Africa.
Okay. Well, we want to get out of here before an hour just because we don't want to abuse the time of our audience.
Yeah.
I just want to thank all of you guys for showing up on the roundtable. Again, we're going to do this every week. Before we go, Johnny, why don't you tell everybody about the amazing work that you're doing on our Arabic language site? If people in our audience, again, speak Arabic and want to get Middle Eastern news from a China, Africa, and Middle East, North Africa perspective, where can they find you?
So they can find us at basically at ilsin /sharqalawsat.com, which is the Arabic version of the China Global South project.
Okay, we'll
So
put links to that
basically,
in the show notes as well.
yes. So basically, we focus entirely on the Middle East and the Arab African countries, and we try to give day-to-day coverage on what's going on between China and the Middle East in Arabic. And very soon we will start to expand our coverage and offering a podcast in Arabic and also English newsletter that deals with Middle East China.
And obviously the demand is huge for that, and so it's really important. And then if you want to sign up for Johnny's newsletter, he writes it every week, twice a week, right? Or once a week we're doing it?
For now, once a week.
Once a week. We're going to
soon we
twice.
will
That's
start
right.
twice a week.
So it's on Thursdays, and just go to the website. Again, the link will be in the show notes, and you just enter in your email. And again, that's all in Arabic. And Jérôme, how about you? Tell everybody about the great work you're doing with Afrique Chine.
So I think I'm not the newcomer in the house. You people know what we do, and I'm really happy. Just to reiterate what we do, you just visit our website in French, projetafriquechine.com, where you're going to find all the content that we've been talking about here, but we cover it in French. We give the African perspective from the Francophone perspective, and we're really happy to have you. We also have a newsletter that comes twice a week, every Tuesday and every Friday. And if you want to subscribe, you just visit projetafriquechine.com. You write your email address on the top, and you're going to be receiving the newsletter. We also have Twitter handle Afrique Chine, where we share pictures and stories and comments about what's happening in China Africa space, and we did that in French. And for my personal account, you're going to find it in the show note that we're going to put just below the show.
And then if you want to follow the work that Antonia and I are doing over on the China Global South Project, you can go to the website. Antonia, just click on her author profile and you'll see all of the work that she's got. And if you want to follow us on Twitter as well, Twitter, they don't call it Twitter anymore. It's on X, of course. And but more importantly, if you enjoy this conversation and really like the work that we're doing and want to follow this in depth, then we'd love to have you join our community of readers, and you can get access to all of our archives, about 5,000 articles, plus you'll get a daily email newsletter. We have our chatbot engine. We're launching a new video section where this team here is going to be doing lots of great video interviews for subscribers only. We have so many cool things in development.
We also have TikTok
you've done
now.
your TikTok as well, which I'll put that up later.
Yes.
And then we've got Jérôme's new white paper that he's released, which we're going to be publishing very soon. Also, we're doing all of these great reports in Arabic, French, and English, which are new research sections coming out. So many cool things, but you got to get it as a subscriber. Subscriptions are super cheap. And also, if you are a student or a teacher, just go ahead and email me, eric@chinaglobalsouth.com, and I will send you half off links for that. So thank you all of you guys. I really appreciate it. It's our second episode. Again, to everybody who's watching, we really appreciate all of your support. We hope that if you're not a subscriber to the channel, you'll click the subscribe button below. And if you're not a subscriber to us in the China Global South Project, we hope you'll join us there as well. So for Antonia in Jakarta, for Johnny in Jerusalem, and for Jérôme in Mauritius, I'm Eric in Ho Chi Minh City. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next week on the CGSP Roundtable.
See you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Next week.